didn't trust or maybe even like scientists that much. So there's a lot of irony there. But I was reading his memoir and I was in the section working my way through it. And I was in the section where he was talking about how they had to think really carefully about health insurance for the Manhattan Project employees because they would be working with radioactivity and they knew that it was dangerous. The reason they knew was, he said, we all remembered the tragic dial painters of World War I. And in that moment, I knew it had to do with radioactivity. Something terrible had happened to the extent that now they knew that it was really dangerous. And so that was the jumping off point for me and Brittany Shaw, who wrote the screenplay with me, in terms of finding the story and then saying, how is it that we didn't remember this story? How is it that we never knew?
And Lydia, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. So tell me then, how did you stumble upon diaries? Because I know you created, Bessie and just some of the characters based on the diaries. Like, where'd you dig those out at?
Well, Ginny, you want to talk more about that?
Yeah. Well, I'll just say that, there's this, one of the most profound things I think that the Radium Girls did, which I think we can all take an example from, is they left this really robust public record. And it's at the Library of Congress. The National Consumers League has a whole collection. You can read the trial transcripts, you can read letters from the sort of key players. And it was through that we realized that there are, and some other research that has been written about them, that the actual Radium Girls did also leave behind letters, diaries. And so one of those diaries is by a woman named Catherine Schaub, who worked at the New Jersey factory. And she left this record that was really inspiring when we were thinking about the idea of teenage girls going through this, because it's not just the facts and figures of what happened, it's what it was like to be a teenager then, and her real vivacity that came through in the way she wrote about her experiences.
So Lydia,
I think what's interesting about Catherine Schaub's diary is that you really did get a sense of her personality, and often you do in diaries, and it was really what pointed us to Joey King to play Bessie, because she, as Ginny just said, she had this kind of joie de vivre, this kind of, vitality. And so the characters that Ginny and Brittany Shaw, the other writer, created were, this dream. Bessie's a dreamer who wants to go to Hollywood, but here she is painting glow-in-the-dark watch dials in Orange, New Jersey. The other sister, Jo, played by Abby Qiunn, wanted to go and be an archaeologist in Egypt. And that was something that resonated from the idea that King Tut's tomb had been discovered, some years before. And so there was this fascination with Egyptology that the Radium Girls could have been, equally obsessed with. So these were things that, led to our world building of how we created the characters for these women.
And building on that, Lydia, so you have this historical source material. When you look at, and now how are we going to tell this story? So you've got, suffrage, you have World War I, you have the pandemic, and then you had to decide an approach to the material and how you were going to direct this and assemble this. So, the things that jumped out at me were, obviously beautiful cinematography, beautiful narrative, beautiful dialogue, fabulous performances. Then there's the use of black and white, which is very interesting choice as a director, as a filmmaker. And then to what degree you interspersed and grounded this fictional, although based on true story, material with, archival footage. So, I mean, if I were to look at like a map, a blueprint of all these components coming together, talk about your point of view. And I know this is your directorial debut, but you've been a, award-winning, producer, and just how you constructed this to say, okay, this is how we're going to plot it. This is how we're going, to use all of these different filmmaking techniques to create an incredibly rich story that was just riveting and engaging. So now I'll be quiet.
Well, thank you for saying that, first of all. But it was pretty organic, I have to say. One of the interesting things about our team is that both Ginny and Brittany Shaw were working after they graduated from NYU. They were working as archival researchers, and they were working on documentaries for the History Channel. And so, you know, Ginny talked about the Manhattan Project one she was on. Brittany was also working on a civil rights documentary. And so when we got to the point where we were, you know, we knew what the story of the Radium Girls was. We knew the arc that we were going to follow. Then we talked about how do we set the world that they live in. And I'll mention that we are, you know, we are a modestly budgeted film. Our budget was under $1 million. So we were looking to be creative and clever about creating this world. And because Ginny and Brittany had so much experience with the archival footage, we started to play around with it. And then it began to even influence, you know, characters. Like we created the character of Etta, who is from Tulsa, Oklahoma, which, you know, when we made the film, I realized this year was a big year for Tulsa and American consciousness. When we made the film, it was really something that Brittany was very attuned to because of her footage research. And so, you know, Etta's a character who moves from Tulsa to the East Coast. Her parents, we ran a photography studio. So she becomes a camera woman in the film that we see a lot of the archival footage through her camera lens. And in order to kind of finesse that, we shot some footage of our own with black and white Bolex, with a black and white Bolex camera. And we filmed some of our own characters in black and white and then merged it, you know, judiciously, but trying to sort of create a flow so it felt like one singular world.
It's fantastic. And then can you talk a little bit about, after you kind of gave birth to these characters, how you thought about, like you had mentioned, you know, Joey King and the Joie de Vivre, but how did you think about who you wanted to approach for this? Because the performances, which shows your brilliance as a director, are understated, but pack a punch. And depending on your characters, you could have characters that are so large that it takes you out of it. And I thought the chemistry between all the characters was beautiful. So can you talk about that process and those conversations and how you landed on the characters?
Well, and most of the characters that you're talking about really are the real characters of the Radium Girls story. So we did have, again, we had research to go back to and think about a little bit. You know, the Dr. Flynn character, Dr. Marlin, the Arthur Roeder, even Catherine Wiley, who works for the New Jersey Consumers League. These are all based on real people. So we worked with the casting director in New York, who is terrific, Cindy Tolan, and her associate, and we had the fortune of having New York Broadway actors available to us. And we were filming in upstate New York, and it was easy to kind of bring people back and forth on the train. So it was, you know, it was really a treasure of just finding the right balance, but kind of influenced by the research that we have of who the real people were, really going for kind of an essence of those characters.
And then how did you bring everyone together? I mean, did you do a series of table reads, or how did you kind of bring everyone together?
Well, we really brought everybody together at the location, which I'll tell you because it's also an interesting story. I was a mentor on the lab for screenwriters over 40, female screenwriters over 40, and they had loaded us up onto a bus and it's amazing wheel center for men with Victorian house called Ginny, and I was like, this is we're shooting Radium Girls. It was like the most amazing occasion. You ask about how we brought people together. Weowaka is one of the oldest women's retreats in the US, and it was actually given to factory women of Glens Falls in the area who worked at the shirt factory as a holiday house. And it's continued tradition all these years. So we just felt like the answer. And that is where we housed our crew. We worked quickly, but we were able to all kind of be in this retreat like about things that shot them.
Fantastic. Well, I want to make sure that I don't hog this whole thing up. So I'm going to ask either Jasmine or Elizabeth to come on and share some of the questions from our audience.
Hello. Nothing in the Q&A yet. I know we got a few questions submitted early via email. One of them was about the editing process and what went into that. If you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, I can just say that, you know, and this is my first film as a screenwriter and a director, and I had never gone through the editing process on a feature before as a director with Lydia. And, you know, I have to say that the room, it was amazing how the room in our edit with the cards mapping the whole film resembled the room when we were still developing the screenplay and looking at structure, because something that happened in the edit, which only became clear as we got more and more into it, was that some of the sort of teenage dream world that had been planned for the beginning, actually, we really needed it towards the middle and sort of second last third of the film to kind of draw back into who these sisters are. And so that was part of the process, I think, was just feeling, now that we had this beautiful footage, really the flow of the story in a different way, and paying attention to that, and looking at, and then especially with the archival, you know, looking at where those turns really had an impact.
Great.
Yeah. And I think when we got to the point of hiring a composer, we really just felt very strongly that we wanted a woman to be the composer. And I realized when you actually make that decision, you realize how underrepresented women are in the composing art industry. And NYU had a screen swing program. And so while there are a lot of people who resorting to be involved, discovered Lydia. And to have seen another Q&A that all decide film girls, but she, you know, she just knocked the park. She embodied this interest in soundscape world and the sound of New Jersey, and yet, you know, going in and out of a story that is still essentially in the jazz age. And so she really created this tone, I think, that allowed you to feel the suspense of what was, you know, being felt with for the girls. But we had a really difficult time finding the right cue when we get to one of the later scenes of the film, when the judge is trying to settle with the girls. And it was late one night, and I said, Lily, cue you wrote that I heard on your reel the first time, and it was a piano cue. And she said, yeah, oh, I wrote that and I played it. And I said, let's just put it up against the picture and hear it. And we did, and it wasn't like anything else that had been in the sound score so far. But it was just beautiful, and I love that she played it. I love that she wrote it, like, you know, before she even became a film composer. But it was one of the beautiful ways of just, you know, of just bringing that female sensibility into the music.
And building on that, there were two things also. One, it was a great collaboration of women working together. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. And then also, you said you had the supportive groups like the National Association of Science Teachers and the International Society of Women Engineers. And there's also a impact piece of this, because right, we don't ever want this to happen again. So if you could talk a little bit about those two things.
Sure. Yeah, the whole movie is female centric. Lily Tomlin and Jane Wagner and Harriet Newman Levy, who's a Broadway producer, are executive producers, and they brought other Broadway producers who are female colleagues, and they really got behind us, and they loved the story as much as we did. And it was just a real parallel to, I think, what happened in the movie as well, because the Radium Girls were kind of picked up and elevated by this early women's political movement of women who had gotten the vote and wanted to use it. So Catherine Wiley of the National Consumers League, she was in touch with the League of Women Voters who they were interested in legislation. You know, she was in touch with Alice Hamilton, who was one of the leading toxicologist scientists, who actually happened to know the drinkers, who were the scientists at Harvard University that American Radium had employed to do the fateful study, which got buried. So there were women all the way through. And there were factories everywhere in America, in a lot of different cities. I think that New Jersey really, should take a bow, because it was a woman in the New Jersey Health Department who called Catherine Wiley and said, I'm really concerned about all of these reports I'm seeing about these women getting sick at this radium factory. It just doesn't make sense that they could all have syphilis. So it was, when you start to peel it back, it's concerned women, concerned citizens that really took a chance and raised their voice or got in touch with somebody else who had a bigger voice than they did. And it's a real, it's almost like, the Radium Girls were the whistleblowers of their time. So that's been a really invigorating part of the story. I think it's one of the things that really makes the story feel like it's an empowerment story. And so we were very interested in running a social impact campaign once we finished the movie. And we are in the middle of it right now. We have over 50 partners in the country that are involved with us. In fact, Madeline, just before I got on the Q&A, I was having a call with the Coalition of Labor Union Women who are going to become a partner with us. So, and then tonight we're talking to the International Society of Women Engineers. I mean, there's so many themes between science and environmental justice and women's studies, women's history, that it's really exciting to kind of bring everybody together, because what we really enjoy is engaging with our audience.
Jasmine, back to you. I see some action happening in the chat and the Q&A.
Yes, we have a few more questions. Here's one. Who in the production was responsible for bringing the medical scenes to life? For example, when the teeth were falling out, it looked so realistic and really drew us in to feel so much pain for Josephine.
That was something that, we, Lydia and I, and, when Brittany and I were writing, we're trying to be really thoughtful about, in terms of how do you show this decay without veering into some sort of like horror film territory, because it's horrifying, but the horror is not, the show here. There's an emotional horror that goes with it. So that was something that we wanted to be very sparing about the moments when we see it. And also, I think that makes the moments even more impactful when they do happen. In terms of the execution, that was something that we got to work closely with our production designer, Emmeline Wilkes-Dupois, and their department, and our cinematographer, Mathieu Planfosse, and really talk about, how are we going to bring this to life? And I do remember us looking at these different, it was pretty grotesque in itself, looking at these different pieces of fake bone that the art department had said of like, do you think this is the right size? Do you think this? And we'll put this kind. And so I think there is something just in terms of the execution that I mean, I think it brought all of us even closer to the horror of the story and trying to say, like, how do we recreate it?
Mhm.
I'm seeing something in the chat between Kat and Karen that I wanted to speak to. They're saying that they love our focus on environmental justice. I think that something that a lot of people don't know, and the EPA had let us know when we finished the movie that they actually use the Radium Girls case a lot, even today, in litigating toxic chemical regulation. And I realized that it's because a lot of the radium contamination is still being contained. And there were, luminous watch dial factories. There was one west of Athens in Georgia. There was one in Ottawa in Illinois, Waterbury, Connecticut. And we know from our factory that was in Orange, New Jersey, that because they took a lot of the radium waste and they put it into concrete and poured sidewalks and house foundations, and then groundwater was contaminated. And it's taken years. I mean, all of these factory sites have become EPA Superfund sites for cleanup. So, at the end of our movie, you see that the radium wasn't really even banned until the 70s, but it's because it's taken that long for the government to really understand how pervasive that contamination has been.
I'll just add to that I'd have to double check on which city, but I do remember reading in terms of the way it's still here today, even if the radium factories, even if we can't see it or there's no labels, there is a radium factory site that at some point, I don't know if it's still today, but there was a fast food restaurant on top of where the radium site was, which is just beyond disturbing.
Yeah, we're partnering with the Sierra Club. They have a Toxics and Health campaign, and we're gonna, if people follow us on our website and our Instagram, you'll see ways to be involved in it. It's something that they have been very strong about in terms of their initiatives, so we're happy to be involved with that.
Shall we ask another question? I love that the film is centered around teenage girls claiming their power. What did it mean to both of you emotionally and creatively as women to tell a story that centers around teenage girls' stories?
Well, that's what I loved about it. And when I read Ginny and Brittany's script for the first time, the idea that this whole story is seen through this female sensibility. And, Ginny and Brittany told me that they loved Sofia Coppola's film, The Virgin Suicides. And I have to say, when I sat in a screening room in Cannes when it was at Director's Fortnight, and there wasn't any buzz or anything because it was a festival. And I just remember having this feeling of, my gosh, that is a female film, that is a totally psychological female film. And it was beautiful. But I was really intrigued by this idea of female storytelling and female filmmaking. And it's kind of when the light bulb went off for me. And as Madeline knows, a lot of my career is very focused on female storytelling. So it means a lot. And it means a lot to be talking with all of you at the Geena Davis Institute, because we can really see, what it means when I'm talking about these being whistleblowers of their time, for young women to kind of take that in and sort of see what's possible. And then you look at, young women in the environmental movement like Greta Thunberg or Jamie Margolin, and what they're able to do and the passion that they bring to the planet. It's all very inspiring. So we're happy to just be a part of that movement.
Yeah, and I would say that one of the things that drew me into the story so immediately was the fact that these were teenage girls going through this in the 1920s, and they are factory workers, and they really are in this position of, on paper, not really having a voice. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they did what they did and found that voice and found women who could bring their story forward, and that we still don't know that story, that's not what's, on the second page of the history textbook when you read about the 1920s. it should be. And so I think that as someone who, and that time in my life when we started writing the movie, that was the first time I was getting excited about history. And today it's one of the passions that just kind of is all encompassing for me. And I thought history was boring. I thought it didn't really have anything for me in terms of the stories that I felt like so completely connected to. And to read this story and to say, not only are they standing up and fighting this fight that is so, feels so cinematic and so like grown up, but they are teenagers. And that means that it comes with teenage things like going on an awkward first date, maybe, and fighting to bring a Harvard study to light that has been buried, and that those two things can go together. And I think that that's exciting too. It doesn't have to be either or.
So Jasmine has one more question from the audience, and then I have a final question for you, because I want to make sure that everybody who's with us today, we give them a call to action. So Jasmine, over to you for the final question, and then we'll do some closing.
Sure. I think you sort of touched on this, but this is such an inspirational story. What originally inspired you to write it? And then Lydia, why did you decide to make this your directorial debut?
Well, I think, everything that I was just saying is what inspired me to write it. But I think that I will say that Brittany and I, we went to film school together, and we both had ambitions to write feature screenplays. And that for a long time, I feel like it was ideas about what a movie I would write, like, it's like what it should be about. And when this story came in front of both of us, there was absolutely no question. And that was a really powerful experience, I think, just as an artist, to understand like when something clicks, it's like it's really meaningful, and follow it.
And Lydia,
Yeah,
of all the things you could have picked, why this?
Well, I've been a longstanding environmental activist. I'll say pretty much since I became a mother 20 years ago. And I have been involved in a lot of sustainability efforts in our film industry. But I was really feeling like, why have I not merged this with my storytelling passion? And I am a feature filmmaker. I've made some documentaries, but I really wanted to come up with a dramatic feature film, because I think that that's where you really can imagine things, and you reimagine things, and design worlds, and design role models. So I was very bent on looking for that, and had sort of put the word out everywhere. And it was just a mutual friend who knew that I was looking for an environmental project, and happened to know that Ginny and Brittany had written this script, and that it had also garnered a Sloan Foundation award. So she put me in touch, and when I read the script, it was just a slam dunk. And we all worked together on it for a while. And I have a producing partner, Emily McAvoy, who was also working with us. And I think at a certain point, Ginny and I just felt like we should team up on this, because she knew the script and the story and the world and the characters so well. And I had all this boatload of craft from all the years of producing, and we both felt passionate. We had worked together so closely for, at that point, it was a couple of years. And we really felt like we had a shared aesthetic, a shared vision. So in order to actually pull this off for such a little amount of money, we decided to team up and do it together, and it's been terrific. Yeah.
It's amazing when you can pull something together that just fits so authentically on who you are as a person. So I know that we're out of time, but we want everyone to understand, what is the game plan? What are your plans to get the movie out there? What should we tell everyone who's on the call to do, promote, tweet, whatever, like, tell us, how can we help you?
Yeah. Well, we do have these campaigns that are coming up that we're going to be undertaking with various partners through the end of the year. So I would say follow us on Instagram at Radium Girls Movie, and we're Radium Girls Film on Twitter. And we have a website, radiumgirlsmovie.com. But we will be posting different things that we're doing that we would love for people to join us and be a part of the community with us. And, it's gonna be a great finish to the year 2020.
It certainly will. Well, the Institute is behind it 100%. And for those of you who did have questions that we weren't able to answer, if you put your email in the chat with your question, we'll be happy to share it with Lydia and Ginny and get you an answer, later on. And Jasmine, is there any other closing housekeeping things that you wanted to mention, or?
No, I think you covered it. Make sure you follow the film on social media and continue to show your support for the film. Thank you so much for doing this.
I had one more question. So then, is there going to be a book based on the film that follows?
That has not come up. Unless Ginny has something in mind, but Ginny did write a play that has gotten some attention, and there's another play out there written by D.W. Gregory, and that play has actually turned out to be in the top 10 high school plays performed in the last 3 years in the U.S. It was kind of astonishing. For people in LA, I know the Archer Girls School is doing a performance on Zoom this weekend. So there's a lot to talk about with this story. And I think that everybody will kind of take it in their own ways and take it forward.
Well, following the movie, there could be a Broadway production if we're ever able to go back to Broadway, and a book. So again, Ginny, Lydia, thank you so much. We love the movie. We're behind you. And thank you so much for taking the time to do this event with us. And thanks everybody who took time out of your day to join us. Take care, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you.